Thank you, and welcome to this year's Governor Frank Leach Lecture and our timely conversation with Senator Elizabeth Warren on government for the few. I'm Susan Moffett. I'm the director of the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy here at Brown University. So glad to have all of you with us here tonight. So glad to have all of you in the simulcast room as well. Thank you for coming. The Taubman Center focuses its programming and its research on three themes: the cost of living, the value of democracy, and the price of security. Senator Warren's work and experience and the topic of her talk tonight speak to all of these themes and the ways they intersect. Tonight's lecture is in honor of Frank Leach, a Brown University graduate, class valedictorian, and later trustee of Brown University. He served for 2 terms as governor of Rhode Island between 1969 and 1973. He was also an accomplished jurist, after whom Rhode Island's Frank Leach Judicial Complex is named. He was known as a gutsy fighter who would rarely back down from speaking his mind. And this is why a lecture series that would bring public officials to speak frankly about issues of the day was established by his family in his memory. In addition to the lecture series, the Governor Frank Leach Internship provides important opportunities for our undergraduates to work in the governor's office here in Rhode Island. The combination of the lecture series and the internship provide really important ways for our students to experience applied public policy and public affairs outside of their classroom. I am grateful for the former First Lady, Dorothy Leach, who is with us here tonight, and to the entire Leach family. Will you please join me in warmly welcoming and thanking the Leach family? We are also grateful to Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse for joining us tonight and for introducing Elizabeth Warren here momentarily. Senator Whitehouse's service in Rhode Island has spanned local and state and federal service. He served as Rhode Island's Director of Business Regulation and was nominated by President Bill Clinton in 1993 to be Rhode Island's United States Attorney. He was elected Attorney General of Rhode Island in 1998 and served in that position in 2003. He was elected to the United States Senate in November of 2006, where he has served as a member of the Budget Committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Finance Committee. Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for your service to the state of Rhode Island and for joining us tonight. Before Senator Whitehouse introduces Senator Warren, I want to just mention a few housekeeping matters. Senator Warren will speak with us for about 30 minutes, and then she will answer questions that students submitted online. Thanks to all the students who submitted those questions. And then we're grateful to Parisa Benini, an undergraduate public policy and economics concentrator who will be posing the student questions to Senator Warren. Now, will you once again please join me in warmly welcoming Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.
Thank you, everyone. It is a huge pleasure to be here the day after Election Day. And to welcome my brilliant colleague from our northern suburb, Massachusetts, down here to Rhode Island, the beating heart of New England. I'm particularly happy to have the chance to introduce Elizabeth at the Frank Leach Memorial Lecture. Governor Leach was a terrific governor of Rhode Island, and as the Jewish community and our whole American community still grieve the murders in the Pittsburgh synagogue, it is also worth noting that Governor Leach was Rhode Island's first Jewish governor. And his First Lady is here with us and his family, and I appreciate very much the contribution of the Leaches. Frank was also a graduate of this great university. So let me say just 2 words about Elizabeth. The first is that there is no one in the United States Senate who sees more clearly or feels more passionately the problem of a political system that has been rigged in order to support an economic system that has been rigged to take advantage of regular people and regular families at the expense of those pulling the economic strings. She not only sees this and feels this, but she has the experience, the knowledge, the education, and the determination to get down in the weeds and catch them at their business where the tricks and traps are buried in the contracts and the deals and the agreements. She is a remarkable colleague substantively. She is also a remarkable colleague politically. Our friend, the majority leader of the Senate, set a trap for Senator Warren that was to end in her censure. And I happened to be on the floor when the trap was sprung, and I believe that the colleagues who participated in setting this up were full of glee at what they were going to be able to do to Senator Warren, who can be a thorn sometimes in their sides. When they sprung the trap and moved the vote of censure, I felt terrible for Elizabeth. What I did not understand was that as the trap closed, the majority leader said, "You know, we tried to warn her. We told her over and over that she shouldn't do this. And yet, she persisted." By nightfall, "and yet she persisted" was going out on T-shirts across America. There are people who ran for office and won in Rhode Island yesterday with "and yet I persisted" as their logo. The agility of turning that trap into a launch pad for a whole new response was a remarkable feat. So it gives me great personal pleasure, because she is a dear friend in the Senate, and also great professional pride as somebody who is in the business that she accomplishes so well, to welcome to the stage, to Brown University, and to the Frank Leach Memorial Lecture, my colleague, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts.
So let me start by saying you have a fabulous senator here in Rhode Island. Jack Reed is wonderful. And Sheldon Whitehouse, a man who is smart, who is determined, and who always fights from the heart. I am very proud to call Sheldon not only a colleague, but a very good friend. Thank you for the warm introduction. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I am also honored to be here to present the Frank Leach Memorial Lecture, and to be able to do this in a period of time after the terrible massacre at Tree of Life. A reminder that we do stay in it, we stay after it, and that it is a great honor to be here and to be here with his widow, Dottie. So thank you, and thank you for all you do in your leadership. Thank you. So wow, what a day to be able to come here. I'm so happy to be back in a university. I feel like, God, you know, this was my life forever, to be at a university instead of in politics, only the day I'm here, it's all politics all the time. I promise by the time we get to the end, I'm gonna see if I can link up some of what I wanna talk about with what happened in last night's election. And who knows, maybe we'll just even throw in a little bit of Donald Trump firing Jeff Sessions so that he can build the runway to be able to escape an investigation of his own activities. Wow, what a task. Let's take at least 30 minutes to do that. So what I want to talk about is I want to just do a story, and I want to start with the story of middle-class America from a time back when. That's my mama in the shorts. My 3 older brothers. I'm the cool one in the sunglasses. You know, sometimes you're born with it. Sometimes you're not. I'm just saying. It's out there. So I grew up in a family that was a paycheck to paycheck family. We had some better times, we had some worse times. My daddy sold paint, he sold fencing. Ultimately, he ended up as a janitor. My 3 older brothers all ultimately went off and joined the military. And by the time I was getting along, 12 or so, it was my mama, my daddy, who was taking this picture, and me. And my daddy had a heart attack. And that's scary for a kid. I mean, it's really scary. Some of you may know what that's like. The neighbors come, they bring a covered dish. People from your church come, they talk in hushed tones. And I kept thinking, my daddy's gonna die. Now, he didn't die. He was in the hospital for a while, and when he came home, it got even scarier. Because when Daddy came home, he just sat. He couldn't go back to work. He didn't talk. He just kind of looked off. And every night, my mom would come in, and she'd put me to bed, and she'd give me a kiss, and she'd leave the room and close the door and start to cry. I could hear her on the other side of the door. And I learned words like mortgage and foreclosure. And one morning I walked into my parents' bedroom and my mother had out on the bed the dress. Some of you may know about the dress. It's the best dress, the one that comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And she had the dress laid out on the bed. My mama was 50 years old. She'd never worked outside the home, and she was terrified. And she's crying, she's talking to herself, she's not talking to anybody else in there, and she just keeps saying, "We will not lose this house, we will not lose this house, we will not lose this house." And finally, she wrestles that dress on, she puts on her high heels, she puts on her lipstick, blows her nose, and she walks to the Sears Roebuck, and she gets a minimum wage job. And that minimum wage job, there she is, answering telephones. She's the one in the plaid dress, the tall one. That minimum wage job saved our home, and it saved our family. Now, that's the story written on my heart. And for years and years and years, I've thought of that story as a story about what you do for your family. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how scared you are, you find that place, you reach down deep, you pull it up, and you do what has to be done to save your family. And then, many years later, it started to hit me. That story is about a second thing. That story is about government. And the reason that story is about government is because my mama got a minimum wage job at a time in America when a minimum wage job would support a family of 3. It would cover a mortgage payment, it would cover utilities, and still put food on the table. And why would a minimum wage job do that? It would do that because the folks in Washington had decided that the way you want to set a minimum wage job is that it's an entry-level job into America's middle class. You go back and look at the records, and they ask the question over and over, what does it take a family of 3 to survive? That is a government that was working for a middle-class family. Now let me just give you the contrast today. Today, a minimum wage job in America will not keep, full-time minimum wage will not keep a mama and a baby out of poverty. It will not cover a median 2-bedroom apartment in any county in America. Think about that. I have sat on the floor of the United States Senate. I've sat in committee, in the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, when we've done hearings on minimum wage, and I have listened to my Republican colleagues say, you know, if it was up to me, there wouldn't be any minimum wage at all. Think about that. If you can get somebody to work for $6 an hour, $1 an hour, how about 25 cents an hour? Then that's what you ought to be able to pay them. That is a government that asks this question over and over and over when minimum wage debates come up. What will increase the profitability of Walmart and McDonald's? Because that is a government that is working for a giant corporation, not working for individuals. And in fact, it's even worse than that. I just want to make one more pitch around this. When my mother got that minimum wage job at Sears, she got 40 hours a week no matter what. Sears took the risk that they would be busy or they would not be busy. Either way, my mama got her paycheck, and my parents could plan around that. My mother had that stability. Go talk to Walmart workers today. Go talk to workers in fast food restaurants. Many of them don't get their schedules until the last minute, and many are not guaranteed. One week it will be 30 hours, one week it'll be 15, the next week it might be 34, and they got to be on call all the time. My mother could plan her schedule around here's when she started, here's when she ended. So it's not only the minimum wage, it's how much risk has been shifted away from corporate America, from business America, and how much has been shifted to the individual, to the little family, to the 3 of us who are trying to make a go of it. So I see this as the big shift in America. The risks have been pushed off, and the government has been right at the heart of it. No new labor laws to help protect on hours, no new labor laws to help protect on certainty, and certainly no new labor laws to lift up a minimum wage so that the minimum wage truly reflects what it costs just to survive at kind of the bottom edge of the middle class. So why has it changed? Why are families doing so much worse? Well, let's take a look at the GDP. It's not that we've gotten poorer. Okay, so here's GDP, and just for those of you who can't read it in the back, these are the years we're going to be using through this. 1935, over to about 2016. There's GDP. And what you see is, yep, it went up, it went down again in 2008. But mostly, what you see from this is GDP has gone up steadily in America. But this actually represents 2 very different periods of economic theory in America. Economic theory meaning not what they're talking about necessarily in the universities, but how government describes itself, what the kind of the principal driving force around American government is. And here are the 2 periods. I'm going to start in about 1935. This is Franklin Roosevelt. We're in the midst of the Great Depression. And the fundamental question is, can government help? Is there anything government can do? Because understand, many people prior to this time had said, no, there's not much government can do. But we live in an era, in 1935, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in detail, in which the idea is that large corporations have crashed the economy, the Great Depression, speculation on Wall Street, a lot of tricks on Wall Street, and government's job is to balance that out and to make this economy work, not for those at the top, to make this economy work for everyone. That's the basic principle. And that's a principle that both lesser and greater, but Democrats and Republicans follow on through about 1980. 1980 going forward, just roughly, I got to pick some times in here, you make a switch, and the switch is to trickle-down economics. And the fundamental point of trickle-down economics is to say government is not a good thing to balance out the power of giant corporations and to help create opportunity. Government is the problem itself. I've always thought the quote that should be the triple underline to understand trickle-down economics is Ronald Reagan's famous, "What are the 9 worst words in the English language?" Some of you may remember. He asked this question rhetorically, and the answer is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you." Ha, ha, ha. So the switch is, you don't want government help. You don't want government balancing out against corporations. Turn them loose. And when the top gets richer, it will trickle down for everyone else. Everyone else will get richer. So that's the 2 time periods we're talking about here. Well, I want to talk about the 2 principal tools in these time periods. The first one, regulation. So I know, cover the children's ears, regulation has a really bad name, but regulation is part of how we make this economy work. So the Great Depression comes along, and Franklin Roosevelt says, he has a very bold idea. He says, I believe that we can use regulation to cut the boom and bust cycle that we have been in since the founding of this country. So think about it this way. What would happen as the economy's going along? It gets a little better, gets a little better, gets a little better, gets a whole lot better, and then crash. And when it comes down, it takes not just the speculators, it takes the small business owners, it takes the employees, it takes the farmers, it takes a lot of people who were never able to build anything up. And then what happens? Wash, rinse, repeat, the cycle starts over again, over and over. And many people believe in the 1700s and the 1800s, it's just natural. It's like gravity. That's how markets work. If you want to have a market, that's how the market has to work. Franklin Roosevelt said, I don't think that's right. Or at least I'm willing to try something. So Franklin Roosevelt said, let's try a little market regulation. And what did he do? Well, the first one is he said, let's regulate the banks so that it's safe to put money in banks. That's FDIC insurance. He said, let's break up the giant banks. That's Glass-Steagall. Separate boring savings account, checking account banking from investment banking. And he said, let's enforce the antitrust laws. Now, it's his cousin Teddy Roosevelt who'd really started those antitrust laws, but it's Franklin that really leans heavy into the enforcement of those laws. And the other one, he said, let's put a cop on Wall Street, and created the SEC so that you couldn't make profits by selling cheat and penny stocks and that sort of thing. And he said, let's put those regulations in place and see what we can do. And here is what we can do. See the significant financial crises. We're going to start back in 1787 when the country is founded, and watch what happens. Boom, a crash. Boom, another crash. Boom, another crash. I'm good at this. Boom, boom, boom. See how they just keep happening? On a pretty regular basis, 1929, and then you notice something happens. They quit until you hit the one of 2008. And notice where we're making the shift. It's right along here in the 1980s when you make the shift from a government that's there to balance against corporate interests, to a trickle-down economy. And what was the first tool of the trickle-down economists is to roll back regulations. Deregulate was the word they used. Deregulate, I'll translate for you, it means fire the cops. Not the cops on Main Street, the cops on Wall Street. And what happens after they start the deregulation? It's about right in here. It gets scarier and scarier and scarier until the risk loads up, and we see the biggest crash that we'd seen since the Great Depression. Okay, so first pitch is you see in time period 1 and time period 2 what happens on regulation. And that you start deregulating, you run more risk in an economy. When you don't have the regulations, you run more risk in an economy. So that's the first one. Second one is the distribution of money. So I want to think about here. Remember how GDP, I'll dance GDP. Remember how GDP was doing that? You remember that? That GDP just keeps going up, goes up in time period 1, goes up in time period 2. GDP goes up the whole time. But there's another interesting question. One interesting question is, how often does it crash? Second interesting question is, who benefits when the GDP goes up? That's a big abstract number, the GDP. As you know, it's all the goods and services, right, produced in this economy. What's the distribution of the money? So here's what I've done with the data here. I've taken 1935 to 1980. I explained why I'd used 1980. 1935 to 1980. And what I look at for this is the distribution of all the new income generated in the economy. So it's how much you're getting in paychecks. It's not Social Security money, it's not money that's given for in-kind health care, but it's who's earning, who's actually out there and able to earn a living out of this. 1935 to 1980, you're gonna love this graphic. Here's the answer. This is the 90% of America. This is the top 10%. And what you see is that top 10%, they did really great. They got about 30% of all new income growth. So they did great. But the 90% of America, everybody not in the top 10%, got 70% of all the new income growth. In other words, everybody did better. People at the top did better, but everybody did better. And by the way, if you disaggregate this one by deciles, you see it works up and down the line. So it was the upper middle class, the middle class, the working poor, the poor. Everybody did better, 1935 to 1980. Now, let's see what happens 1980 to 2016. Same division, the 90% of America and the 10% of America. How does new income growth, remember, GDP was still on that upward slope. As a country, we're getting richer and richer and richer. It's really moving up that slope. How does the income get distributed? Yeah. Almost 100% of new income growth from 1980 until 2016, the latest I've got data for, goes to the top 10%. Yeah, there's money for Social Security and other things, but earnings, where is it going? It has all shifted to the top. So the question on that one is why? What were the two tools? One tool was regulation that we talked about, and we saw how that affected the crashes. Second tool, progressive taxation. And when you invest, what you do with the money in progressive taxation. So I have a bunch of fancy slides. I don't want to do too many here. But basically, what we see is that taxation under trickle-down economics, one of the first things to do, it's deregulate and cut taxes for those at the top. And then once they cut taxes for those at the top, there's less money to spend on education, on infrastructure, mass transit, things that let you get to work, plus the good jobs they produce right there at that moment. Less money to spend on research, less money to spend on the things that create opportunities for everyone. So you look at the first time period, we have aggressive progressive taxation and a lot of reinvestment in creating opportunities in America. A lot of investment in public education. A GI Bill, a grateful nation, says to returning soldiers and sailors will help pay for you to get a technical education, a college education. Lots of investment in elementary schools, lots of investment in infrastructure, in mass transit, in a statewide highway system, interstate highway system, over and over and over. You shift over in the 1980s and you start pulling back on taxation, you flatten out the taxation and pull back on those investments. And as a proportion of GDP, they all start to go down. And income starts to shift over this period of time. So, and let me just give you one more. So here's the conclusion I draw from this. I draw the conclusion first, government matters. My mother worked her heart out. She was scared to death. She went to the Sears and she worked long hours. But we were able to succeed as a family, not just because my mother worked hard. We were able to succeed because of decisions, policy decisions that had been made in Washington. Someone today could be just like my mother and work twice as hard as my mother worked, and yet not be able to save a home, not be able to save a family. Government matters, and it matters in big macro ways like how many crashes we have, when those crashes occur, and how money gets distributed in this economy. So that's my first pitch. And if that one's not enough for you, I'm going to offer just one other quick one off to the side. We have pretty good data on the black-white wealth gap in America. And it starts back in the 1940s. That's when they first start measuring the difference in the wealth, the median wealth of African-American families and white families. And what they discover in the black-white wealth gap, it's huge. And it stays huge. From when we first start measuring it, it stays fairly steady. But here's the part that's really interesting. 1965, the heart of the civil rights movement, suddenly the law changes. Finally, right? And employment discrimination is outlawed. People have access to accommodations, investments in our public schools to bring up the schools that have been so starved for resources, principally the African American schools. All of these changes in the law, it's not to say that every one of them was immediately implemented and fully, they weren't, but they were a new infusion of cash and opportunity. And here's the key. In 15 years, as you're getting to the end, I need my other slide, 1965 to 1980, the black-white wealth gap in America shrinks by 30%. You know, not perfect, but boy, does it tell you. You change the policies and you can make a big difference in a lot of lives. And here comes the hook. 1980 to 2016, trickle-down economics, you shift that around, big crash in 2008, and all families hurt in 2008, right? But what happens to the black-white wealth gap, 1980 to 2016? Answer, it triples. So my pitch from all of that is government matters, it matters enormously. And it's this fundamental question of who government works for. Is government working for my mama and a middle-class family to try to give them a chance to get into the game, to try to create some opportunities? Or is government there to help those at the top and let the rest of it trickle down? How am I doing on time? Have I got another minute? It's about time for me to stop. Good. So I will do it, but I'm going to make 2 quick pitches then before I do it, so I don't do enough. I just want to say one more thing. Why do you think the law changes? Because I think this is the fundamental question in Washington right now. It's not like a bunch of Americans woke up one day and said, you know, damn that government that works for all of us. Who needs that? I would make a longer pitch that it starts when very rich people and very big corporations figure out that there is money to be made from capturing the federal government. And capturing it not just through campaign contributions, but capturing it through lobbying, capturing it through think tanks, capturing the government so that in every decision that gets made, there's just a little tilt toward those who've already made it big, those who can hire the lobbyists, those who can put the think tanks out there, those who can have the bought and paid for experts, and just a little more tilt and just a little more tilt. In fact, I'll show you one picture on that, and that is lobbying. We don't have great numbers on this, but this is the best I could find. Back in 1983, $200 million was spent on lobbying the United States Congress. By 2002, it was $1.8 billion. And by 2017, it's $3.4 billion. And by the way, that's only the formally reported numbers, not all the other ways that this is done. The lobbying laws are like Swiss cheese. So we can talk about those too. I have a great anti-corruption bill you would all love. So that goes to exactly this question. So let me just wrap it up because I do want to make sure we leave time for as many questions as possible. But let me wrap it up by saying all of the debates we're having right now in Washington, in my view, fundamentally are about this question. It's about whether or not you go into a health, education, labor, and pensions committee meeting thinking that our job is to think about what it's like to be a minimum wage worker, a first-time worker, somebody who's been thrown out and trying to get back in, or whether or not you think that the way we ought to be thinking about those rules is what's the most attractive rule for the giant companies that hire these folks. And so for me, that's what everything that's going on in Washington is about. And we just had an election yesterday. And here's the part that gives me hope. There are a whole lot of new Democrats coming in. Yay. Okay, that was not political. That was merely descriptive. Who may not have used these words, but who did run on a very progressive agenda that government is an important part of our lives and that government should have a role to play in helping make sure that every one of us gets access to affordable health care, that we get access to an education, that Social Security survives and is strong and robust. And so I think that's how the pieces will link together, but maybe we can do more in the Q&A. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Want to do this?
Thank you, Senator Warren. And I'd now like to welcome Parisa Banani, the undergraduate public policy and economics concentrator who will be posing the student questions that were submitted online.
Good. Come on up. How are you? Very nice to see you. You can see the rest of my slides here.
I can.
Yeah, they're cool. But none are as cool as me in the sunglasses.
Oh, not at all. Hardly, no.
Yep.
My name is Parisa. I am a public policy and economics concentrator, and it is an honor to be here to ask these questions for you today. These were submitted from undergraduate students, PhD students. We'll try to get to as many as we can.
I'll do my best.
So the first one we have here is by Alistair. He or she is a PhD candidate in neuroscience. Also, I'm very sorry if I butcher any names. My apologies. In the United States, there are more than 44 million student loan borrowers who collectively owe $1.5 trillion in student loan debt. How can the U.S. solve the student loan epidemic?
So, can I just actually say the problem is even worse
Yeah.
than described here? No, I just want you to think about this for a minute. The student loan debt crisis is really rolling out of control. Think about it this way. Here's this giant snowball of debt. And every year, some people graduate and start paying, and some new freshmen come in, right? There is so much now debt at such a high interest rate, and so many people who can't pay and are therefore running up late fees and charges and so on, that the snowball is growing at a rate of $100 billion a year. So that's how big the problem is now. What did the problem look like back when I was a kid? I'll tell you the answer to that. I told you, my daddy ended up as a janitor. There was no money for a college application for me, much less being able to pay for college. Now, I have a checkered history. I was a high school debater. I got a scholarship, yay! I dropped out of college, ooh. To get married, to my first husband, So there I was, at 19, answering phones in Houston, Texas. And I thought my dream of becoming a public school teacher was gone, because I would never have the chance to graduate from college. No one in my family had graduated. I thought, gone for me. And then I found out that about a half an hour away, there was a commuter college that cost $50 a semester. And for the cost that I could cover on a part-time waitressing job, I got a 4-year diploma and worked with special needs kids in public school. Why does that happen? Because America invested in those schools. Because America invested in those opportunities. Because America said back then, any kid who's willing to do the work should have a chance to get a college diploma or technical degree debt-free. That's our 2 time periods. So that's my starting place. Now, my answer on what we could do about it, I'll tell you what we could do about it. The Republicans just gave away $1.5 trillion to billionaires and giant corporations. My view is we need to take some of that money and use it to reduce the student loan debt burden and make the investment in college to make college debt-free for all of our young people. I think it's a question of choices. That's what every budget is. And a tax budget that says billionaires and giant corporations, trickle-down economics, is where they want to invest $1.5 trillion of your tax money. I think the choice should be no. We should make that investment in young people who are trying to get an education. So we can do this. This is not rocket science. The problem is political.
Right.
All right.
All right, number 2. This is from, it's from Dhruv, an international relations concentrator, asks, do you see your American Housing and Economic Mobility Act as in line with the housing first model that is widely accepted as the best way to address homelessness?
So interesting question. So Drew asks a question about a bill I have, and know that I did not get this as a setup so that I would be able to talk about something, but it really is important. So let me just do the shortest version I can. We have a housing crisis in America, and it's a housing crisis at all levels. It's a housing crisis with homelessness, but it is also a housing crisis for young people who can't afford apartments. It's a housing crisis for people who can't afford to buy their first home. It's a housing crisis for people who were shut out of housing because of redlining. in principally African American communities. I should stop just to explain this, just for 1 second. Do you know what the official policy of the federal government was from the 1930s through the 1960s? I was talking about time one, time two. Let's talk about another part of that. And that is, homeownership is great. Let's support homeownership. And you know what? They're right. It's the #1 way that middle-class families build wealth. They buy a home, they keep paying. After 20 years, after 30 years, the house is paid off. That means they've got this asset. The asset tends to keep appreciating. They can borrow against it to start a business. They can, if they're lucky enough that grandma and grandpa get to live there until they die, they can pass it to the next generation. It's the #1 way you create intergenerational wealth in middle-class families. And wow, did it work if you were white. African Americans, the answer was no. The federal government actually took out maps and marked off communities of color. And they marked them off in red. That's why it's called redlining. And just said, in effect, FHA money, federal money, your tax money, will not be available for any mortgages in the redlined area. It was a way to keep African American families from building that wealth, not just in one generation, but intergenerationally. So we've got a housing crisis. And by the way, that shows up then in the housing stats, where white homeownership is substantially higher than African American homeownership, big gap, which feeds into what I was talking about on black-white wealth gaps, right? So all these pieces fit together. So what can you do about that? So here's what I've done. I've put together a bill, and the first part of the bill is about supply and demand. And the bill says we ought to put a whole bucket of money into building more housing in America right now. We actually have a housing shortage. It's true in cities, it's true in small towns, it's true in rural areas, it's true on tribal lands, it's true in formerly redlined areas. We need more housing. And the problem is the private market has shifted over these decades so that it is more profitable to build for rich people. Because of the fixed costs in it, it just makes more sense. I'm not mad at anybody, it's just where they go to make their money. And as a result, you're watching a shrinking, decaying housing market for everybody pretty much from middle class all the way down to homeless. So here's my proposal. We put a lot of money in, we build new housing units. My proposal has a lot of details, but it's basically about 3.2 million new housing units. That would produce about 1.5 million jobs when it's at its peak. And independent analysis says you could bring down the rent by about 10% for all these families. And more people get to buy housing because, so you've got both halves. We're helping the renters, we're helping the homeowners, and politically, we're putting all the groups together. Instead of saying we're only going to help the homeless, and everybody else says, wait a minute, that's less pie for me, you put everybody together and say, we can do this by adding more housing. And what this bill proposes is that we address the redlining problem directly. And that for the first time legally, the United States steps up, said yes, the government engaged in redlining, it was wrong, and we're now going to take at least some steps toward changing that. So what I propose in here is that anyone living in a formerly redlined area gets down payment assistance to be able to buy a home, a boost that would have come from families over the generations if people hadn't been redlined out. So the idea is we try to get a little more fairness back into the housing system. Now here's my last point about housing though. I love this bill. I worked on this bill with housing advocates from everywhere. People who work with the homeless, people who are working with middle-class families, people who are working on the East Coast and the West Coast and in the Midwest and Upper Midwest, lots of different places, lots of different groups. And they all love this. So we get it together. and I go talk to people in Washington, D.C. about it. I've talked to reporters about it, and I've talked to some of my colleagues in Congress about it. And the first question they always ask is, how are you going to pay for that? That is a lot of money. You don't just get to run up the debt. I realize you only get to run up the debt if you're giving away $1.5 trillion to billionaires and giant corporations. And my answer is, actually, if we would simply reimpose the estate tax, that is tax at the time of death, that was in place on families back during the George W. Bush administration, so not so very long ago, if those families had to pay a progressive estate tax, you could actually pay for all of that housing. And the response, 100% of the time that I've gotten from people I've talked with about this, is, oh, if you're, and by the way, that's 10,000 families. If you're asking those richest 10,000 families, no middle-class family would pay a nickel, even an upper-middle-class family. If you're asking those richest 10,000 families to pay more at death, you will never get this through. And I just want you to think about what that means in a democracy. So you can't do something that would build 3.2 million new housing units. Think of the echo effect of that, of building out that. Help, what, millions, tens of millions of people on their housing. Help take a first step toward redressing wrongs that the federal government participated in. And the answer is, it is a non-starter, because relatively speaking, a tiny group of the richest Americans would, and here's the language most people use, never permit it to happen. For me, that housing bill right now, trying to get that going, that is the ultimate question of who government works for. If you really think it works for the top 10,000 families, you're right, I can never get this bill going. I am not giving up on it, though. I think we can have a government that works for everyone else. So that's why I'm in this fight. You bet.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Nate, a Master of Public Affairs student, who asks, why did you release a video confirming your distant Native American heritage? And to that, I have to veer a little off my own script and add my own question here, is that, and why is it that only recently you've spoken on it and attempted action on that part of your life and your family?
So, some of you may know, Donald Trump has attacked me for a long time now, based on my ancestry. Both of my Senate opponents were doing the same. And my response to attacks is just to try to be as transparent as possible. I've put out 10 years of my tax returns. I put out every single one of my hiring records and documents that we could lay hands on. And yeah, I took a DNA test. And I put it all out on the internet. Anybody can see it. They can make of it what they want. Now, I get it. I am not going to keep Donald Trump from hurling racial insults. I'm not going to be able to stop Donald Trump from trying to turn Americans against each other. But I think this is a time when we have a choice to make as Americans. And it's whether or not we're going to go to our corners or whether or not we're going to pull together, kind of like I talk about here, and try to build something that works for everyone. I am not a tribal citizen. Tribes and only tribes determine tribal citizenship. But every single one of us should be outraged when Donald Trump attacks Native Americans. I am not a person of color, but every single one of us should acknowledge that communities of color are under assault. I am not an immigrant, but every single one of us should speak out when the Trump administration takes babies away from their mothers and locks up little children at the border. I believe in the worth of every single human being. And I believe that's how we build something together. Not perfectly, not forever, but that we learn and we do better and that we build something together. I looked at the results yesterday of this election and I said, this is our chance. We're going to have a lot of new people come to Washington. Let's build it together. Let's build an America that doesn't just work for those at the top. Let's build one that works for everyone. Good question.
Thank you. Probably only have time for one or two
One
more.
or two
One
more.
or two more.
I'll try to be shorter.
We have a question from Max, an undergraduate student, who asks, if the 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act, which would block any mix of commercial and investment banking, were to be enacted, how would large-scale innovation and growth occur in the American economy in light of smaller firms and decreased access to capital?
Oh, well, Max, I think you got a premise on your mistake in there. Large firms in America are not lending to small businesses anymore. It's basically community banks and at best a little above community bank size. The biggest firms in America right now, principally, not 100%, but principally, are doing their lending in two directions. They either want to lend for giant deals, where it's hand-tailored and they make good money doing that, or they want to lend where the cost per loan is low. In other words, credit cards, consumer loans, mortgages, things that are very routinized. You can do them by the numbers and say, we'll take a credit score this big in a neighborhood like this and make it all work through sort of like by computer. Indeed, I think there's a good argument to be made that the concentration that we now have in financial services of giant banks and meaning traditional banking and investment banking kind of all rolled together is actually snuffing out a lot of the access to capital that would be available. You split these things up and make the banks, the banks have to make their money by lending, not by speculating on Wall Street and IPOs. Make them make it by lending. They are a regulated industry that gets a protected monopoly. And my view on that is they ought to have a boring business and a boring business model, but one that produces pretty steady profits. You want to take risks, go over to the investment banking side of the house. So I actually want to say, was it Matthew? Max. I want to say to you, Max, if you really want to see more money flow to mid-level and small businesses in America and stimulate more innovation, then sign on to my 21st Century Glass-Steagall Act, because I think that's exactly what it is designed to do.
Okay. We're done. No, we're done.
Oh,
That is
darn.
the last question
Okay.
for us. Yeah.
Oh, anytime you get to end on Glass-Steagall, you know it was a good day. So.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Warren.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Thank you, Parisa Banani. And thank you again to the Leach family.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you for being here.